Before the video starts, just a quick reminder to go check out the Chilling app. If you can't get enough content from me here on this channel, myself and other narrators here on YouTube are going to be providing hours of unique and spine-tingling scary story narrations exclusively over on the Chilling app. There's new narrations from me added weekly, and there's new professional narrators constantly being added to the list. So far, there's over 400 stories to binge, from monsters, paranormal, thrillers, and true scary stories. The Chilling app even recently added classic novels, vintage horror radio, and true crime stories. And this all can be enjoyed with their one-of-a-kind ambient menu, where you can mix in immersive and relaxing sound effects like rainstorms and crackling fireplaces, and adjust their volumes independently, and a sleep timer so you can drift off to dreamland without interruptions. Click the link in the description or the pinned comment to try the free trial of the Chilling app, and after that, it's only $2.99 a month, which makes it completely ad and interruption free. And don't forget, Chilling is giving away an Xbox Series X bundle. There's another link down below with simple instructions on how to enter, and a winner will be selected September 27th. Thanks so much, friends, and now enjoy the stories. Back when I started teaching full-time, I decided to spend 3 weeks of my summer break traveling solo through Asia. Instagram travel influencers have been fueling my wanderlust for literally years with their Taj Mahal selfies and panoramas of Koh Samui. But I just didn't have the money during my college years, and given how my first year of teaching just kicked my absolute butt, I decided I'd treat myself to a well-deserved vacation. I decided on 1 week in Thailand, 1 week in India, and another week in Japan, after which I'd fly back to the US. Thailand was awesome, but it was super chill, so after a week of relaxation, I was ready for a little more excitement, which is how I ended up in New Delhi. The change of pace was so drastic that I found it a little overwhelming at first. I'd grown way too comfortable with the tranquility of Thai beaches, so the hustle and bustle of central New Delhi was nothing short of a sensory overload. Even so, it was an incredible experience. Yet I'm sad to say that an incident there ended in one of the worst, most terrifying experiences of my entire life. And as much as I have a tremendous amount of respect for the people and cultures of the countries I visited, it was the first I felt lucky to live where I do. So, the market area of New Delhi has a lot of these small, arterial back streets that are surprisingly easy to get lost in. Most of the time that's not a problem, as not only do you make all sorts of marvelous discoveries, but the mostly Anglophonic Indians are only too happy to give you a navigational helping hand. However, in one section, I ended up coming across 3 young boys, no older than 5th or 6th grade age, who were holding little plastic bags of what looked like spices. They started trying to sell me the spices in broken English, and I have to be honest, it really tugged at my heartstrings. So I started saying like, okay, I'll buy some. What is it? Turmeric? Masala? They kind of look at me quizzically until they hear masala, at which they start nodding and parroting me. Yeah, masala. Very good. Buy, please. One of the kids opens up a small clear plastic bag and reaches inside and takes out a handful of the bright orange powder. He brings it up to his nose, gives it a whiff, and makes a face like, yummy, before offering me a turn. Only when I lean in to take a whiff, the kid leans in and blows the handful of powder right in my eyes. I imagine what I felt in the moments that followed is a lot like being pepper sprayed. It was the most unbearable, debilitating pain I've ever endured. I couldn't see, I could hardly breathe, my eyes and nostrils were burning, and all he'd doused me with was chili powder. And not like Kirkland brand, made in the USA for suburban mom's chili powder. I'm talking weapons-grade, uncut, atomic-level chili powder from the land that invented spicy. I was just out of it. but not enough that I didn't feel someone unclip my fanny pack before grabbing my phone out of my hand. I'm screaming, Hey, give that back! But all I get in response is this hysterical laughter which gets quieter and quieter as they make off with my valuables. I'm completely blind as I fumble through my backpack to retrieve the bottle of lukewarm water I'd stashed away, as I use it to try and wash some of the chili powder out of my eyes. I'll admit that I did cry a little, just feeling like a naive idiot and wondering how in God's name I was going to get a new passport and credit card. I was due to fly out to Osaka in 2 days, so it was looking like my entire trip was going to be ruined by 3 little street urchins. Now, I know what you're thinking. This story wasn't remotely scary, you just got robbed. But please, hold your horses, because the scary part is yet to come. In order to make good on a travel insurance claim, I'd have to at least file a report with the local police. I didn't have much faith that they'd find the kids, based on my poor descriptions, not their level of competence, but I figured I'd have to show some due diligence on my part in order to secure a payout. So that's what I do. I file a report, hit up an internet cafe to file my insurance claim, then head back to my hotel to get some rest. I was still able to communicate thanks to the hotel reception taking and transferring calls up to my room. I just didn't think anyone would be in touch so quickly. Because I get woken up from a nap by some New Delhi cop who says, "Miss, I believe we've recovered your misappropriated possessions and have arrested the wicked miscreant who stole them from you." I literally jumped from joy when I hung up the phone. My trip wasn't going to be ruined after all. Only that wasn't quite the case. It was still about to be ruined, well, partially anyway, but it wasn't in the way I'd first imagined. I get to the police station and there he is, the little idiot who blew chili in my eyes, and the cops had got my phone and purse. There's just one problem. All the money is missing and my passport is gone. I relay this to the cops and adding that there were 2 other kids who took part in the robbery, and that it was them who most probably had my passport and money. Let me be clear. I didn't care about the money. It was only a few thousand rupees, no more than 40 or 50 bucks. It was my passport that I needed. Now, from what I understand, the cops then start talking to this kid in Hindi, telling him to call his friends and order them down to the station. The kid shrugged and shook his head, so I didn't need a translator to know he was just playing dumb with them. I'm telling them to translate for me like, "Keep the money, kid. I just need the passport. The passport. Bring that back and you can keep the money." I don't know if they translated that for me, but the kid just kept shaking his head, getting increasingly agitated until he seemed to be begging the police officers to let him go. It was about then that one of the officers turned to me and said, "Madam, rest assured, we will secure your passport by hook or by crook." I swear those Indian cops still spoke like Victorian-style English. I found it super cute and quaint for the most part, but that night, it only made what he said seem extra ominous as he dragged the kid off to an interrogation room for questioning. This left me and his partner in this little waiting area, and we could hear every single thing that happened. Talking turned to shouting, shouting turned to screaming. Then all of a sudden, I could hear furniture spilling over before the kids started wailing. Then we could hear like thwack, thwack, thwack. Each strike followed by a blood-curdling scream as the cop beat the life out of the kid who robbed me. I turned to the guy's partner like, Whoa, you can't just beat it out of them, that's police brutality." The partner just looked confused. "Madam, this boy stole from you. Do you not wish to return your belongings?" I don't mean he was being facetious or anything either, like he seemed genuinely puzzled at my indignation. "Yes, but you can't treat people like that, he's just a boy." That's when the cop's partner leaned over his desk, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Better him than you." I don't think it was an outright threat, but in that moment, I realized just how far away from home I really was. I'm not saying we don't have problems with our police here in the US, but at least I have the power to do something back home, where I at least have rights a shot at due process. But there, in that little New Delhi police precinct at 1:30 in the morning, there was nothing to do but shut my mouth and hope to get my passport back. Which I did, by the way. The kids' friends showed up with my stuff, handing it over before the cops dragged them into the interrogation room. I got out of there before I heard the next set of screams. I'd heard more than enough for one night, but that didn't stop me from rehearing the one kid's wails over and over again through a long and sleepless night. Many years ago, I was a child living in the Western African Republic of Cameroon. My parents had relatively well-paying jobs in the city of Bamenda, where most of our family lived, but we also had relatives in the small rural town of Bois, which is about a 3-hour drive to the north. Every year during the summer break from school, me, my parents, and my little brother would drive up there to spend a week or two with our aunts, uncles, and cousins. Those trips made for some very happy memories for the most part. But the year of 1986 brought something that would become the biggest memory of all, a memory that would come to haunt me for the rest of my life. One of the reasons we were going to see our relatives was because my grandfather was sick, so sick that he sometimes had to use an oxygen mask to breathe properly. Naturally, my mother nor my father believed he had very long left to live, so it was very important that we see him one last time before he passed away. Unfortunately, they were right, but that oxygen tank would play a critical role in what followed, and it wasn't just my grandfather who passed away. Many others would too. We arrived in late August, intending to return home in early September. Then one night, I went to bed as carefree as can be, only to wake up in a living nightmare. I woke up suddenly to feel something covering my mouth and nose, yet when I tried to breathe, I found I wasn't being suffocated. The air was cool and strangely exhilarating, but seconds later the thing was pulled away and I found myself choking. I start to panic, and I try to speak, but nothing will come out. And then I see my father putting my grandfather's oxygen mask back on my face, and suddenly I can breathe again. It was like a bad dream. I was so confused. Was this really happening, or was it a nightmare where I imagined I was my grandfather? I wish I could tell you the latter, but tragically, what was happening to me was very real. The next thing I remember, my father is telling me, "Omaru, we have to leave. Take a deep breath, and then hold it for as long as you can." I did as he told me, and then he picked me up and carried me as he ran through the darkness towards our truck. This was back before Bois had any proper electricity, but each home had its own generator and the odd light fixture inside or outside the house, so the place was not very well illuminated. However, there was just enough light for me to see people outside their homes, their chickens lying lifeless in their coops, with their animals having keeled over where they stood. I just knew they were dead. It was the awkward positions in which they had fallen. Images of that scene haunted my dreams for a long time afterward. After that, I remember my father and I taking turns on the oxygen mask as he drove through the night. Sometimes I would run out of breath and breathe in just a little bit out of habit, and that's when I noticed the disgusting smell that seemed to be in the air. Almost like the world outside was rotting before our very eyes. Through his headlights, I could see all kinds of animals lying dead at the side of the road. Birds and monkeys that had fallen out of trees, their lives taken by some silent, invisible murderer. I was so scared, so confused. I had all these sore spots in my arms, small wounds almost like burns, and I had no idea how I'd gotten them. I was aware of a slight mist in the air, and it somehow gave me the feeling that we had arrived in the end times, the time when all the things are called back to God. But if that was the case, why were me and my father still alive? And why was breathing my grandfather's oxygen mask saving us from sharing the fate of those animals? We had to drive slowly on the way to the nearest town, a place called Womb, because it wasn't just dead animals littering the road. At one point, We drove rather quickly around a bend in the road and my father nearly crashed because around the corner, there was a dead man in his truck, just slumped over the wheel. When we arrived in Wombe, the sun was already rising and people were out of their houses, all making a fuss over something. I remember passing out from exhaustion a short while after my father carried me from the truck, and I didn't wake up again for 24 hours. When I did, I was in a hospital, and my father had some very bad news for me. Every single member of our family was dead. My mom, my little brother, all my aunts and uncles, and all my cousins. One cousin would turn out to be alive later on, but at that time he believed that they were all dead. I was devastated, completely and utterly heartbroken, but the one question I had in that moment was, why? And I think the explanation horrified me just as much as all the deaths. In the early hours of the 21st of August, some kind of ecological event caused hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 to be released from the nearby Lake Nyos. Some have said it was an earthquake that triggered the release, but neither myself nor my father remember any kind of tremor the night before. But either way, the CO2 was thrown up into the sky. Then, because it's heavier than oxygen, it fell to the earth and covered all the surrounding towns and villages for miles around. I still have no idea what caused the wounds on my arms. Some think it was because of superheated volcanic gases, but that's never been fully proven. And although humanity now understands a lot more about the incident, some things still remain unexplained to me. Scientists called it an event which occurs just once every 1,000 years, and that we were just unlucky to be in the area on the night in question. Bad fortune. It seems like a sick joke to just put it down to that, because for me, and the loved ones of the 1,600 other people who died that night, it'll prove to be the defining event of our entire lives. When I was in 3rd grade, a guy came to our school and held our class hostage on the last day before summer break. He didn't hurt anyone, and it was so long ago that it almost seemed like it happened to someone else. Like I can remember being scared and all, and I'm so detached from it that I don't mind talking about it. Anyway, it turned out this guy had already gone berserk and killed his wife and showed up to our class to take his kid out too, who just so happened to be a member of my class. I don't know if he had really gone through with it, but luckily, the cops had followed him to the school, and I think that must have thrown a huge wrench into the works, so to speak. But that didn't stop him from tying up our teacher, dragging a few of the kids around, and threatening to kill us multiple times before he attempted to flee using one of the teacher's cars. I think the cops ended up chasing him to the state line, where the Indiana State Police took over the pursuit and stopped the guy before he could do any more damage. Apparently, he'd been on the way to kill his parents who lived in Fort Wayne, so it's a dang good thing that they managed to get him off the road. I heard it was because he had a complete nervous breakdown and believed that he needed to save his family from being taken by demons or something like that. But who knows why crazy people do the things they do? Looking back on it, I can kind of see why I suppressed it. My dad used to own a gas station on the Philly section of the I-95, and during summer breaks from college, I'd work the night shifts to earn a few extra bucks in beer money. It was awesome for a bunch of reasons, as I was usually up at those times anyways, and the solitude gave me a chance to either smoke up or read books whenever I wasn't cleaning or cycling stock. On the rare occasion I did get a customer, they were usually pretty chill, and since we had a pay-before-you-pump system in place, we didn't have to put up with any drive-aways. But then this one night, I noticed a guy driving up to one of the pumps, and right away I can tell there's something wrong. He swerved in way too fast, had to straighten up to even get his butt end near the pump, and his car seemed to be lurching before he finally got out. Most customers see the pay before you pump sign and just walk inside right away, But this dude is screwing around with the pump trying to get it to work, obviously drunk out of his skull. I have to call out to him over the intercom like, "Dude, pay before you pump." He looks around, finally gets the hint, then walks inside the store. It's only then that I saw the blood on the guy. Blood that was coming from one of the most serious-looking head injuries I've ever seen. I swear to God I could see sections of this guy's skull from what looked like repeated strikes from a blunt object. Immediately I'm like, dude, oh my God, let me call 911. Because if it was a brain injury that was making him act all drunk, then that was definitely bad news. But then the second I mentioned 911, he suddenly forgets about buying gas, thanks me for my time, whatever that meant, and walks back out towards his car and drives off. I call 911 anyway. I mean, not even just for his well-being either. He was in serious danger of causing an accident the way he was driving. I file a report, hang up, and think that's the last I'll hear about it. About a week later, a cop car pulls into the gas station, only it doesn't stop at the pumps. It pulls into the side next to my own parked car. The cops hadn't stopped for gas. They'd stopped to ask me if a Caucasian male with a head injury had stopped by about a week prior. Of course, I told them he had, and then I asked if he was okay. I was kind of relieved to hear that he was, but then not too relieved to hear how he'd gotten his head injury. He'd been attacked with a blunt object, all right, but his wounds had been inflicted by a homeowner defending their property after the guy had tried to break into his young daughter's bedroom in the middle of the night. He was wanted in connection with 3 other attacks on young girls in the same area, attacks he'd been a lot more successful in. It made me sick to my stomach thinking I tried to help a guy like that, and it suddenly made all the sense in the world why he ran when I mentioned calling 911. It did come with a little piece of good news, though. The guy was in custody and the cops were just in the process of mapping out his movements on the night of his 4th attack. Last I heard, he went to prison for a long, long time, and I'm not shy in my opinion that they should just bury that dude in concrete, under the freaking prison. Every so often I hear someone say something like, cell phones were the worst thing to ever happen to humanity. Now all anyone does is stare at their phone instead of socializing with each other. I'd like to formally call nonsense on that because if we'd had commercially available cell phones back in the early 90s, one of the nicest men I ever met might still be alive today. He was one of my dad's old merchant marine buddies who ran a military surplus store on an old commercial lot out in the sticks, and he was kind enough to give me a summer job to pay for this and that when he was barely making any money himself. I mostly worked Fridays and Saturdays with the exception of Sunday when the store would close for good just over 24 hours. So one Saturday we close up and Donnie is taking out one last bag of trash before he drove home. He tells me I'm good to go. Then the last I see of him, he's standing in front of his car opening up the store's dumpster. Monday morning, I drive into work to see that it's closed. Donnie would always open up earlier than I'd arrived, so I figured something weird had happened for him not to have shown up. But that was just the thing. Donnie had never left. I drove around the back to find him pinned in between the dumpster and his car, which wasn't actually visible from the highway at all. He hadn't put it in park, and because he was an older guy, the mild impact still pinned him, broke some bones, caused some internal bleeding, and he just bled out over the course of the next 6 or 7 hours. It messed with my head for the longest time after, because if I'd have left just a minute or so later, I'd have been able to save him. That, and they weren't even particularly dangerous injuries. EMTs could have gotten there in like an hour or 2 afterward and would have still been able to stabilize him. But a mix of blood loss and hypothermia took him out in the end, with not a single other person hearing his terrified cries for help. My dad doesn't blame me for what happened. I used to think he did, but we had a heart-to-heart on it a while back, and I know he doesn't carry any resentment for me. That being said, I still think it's my fault. I still think I should have stayed. If I did, there's no doubt in my mind that Donnie would still be alive. My dad's mate used to own a cottage in Anglesey, North Wales, and would rent it out to holiday makers during the summer. It made him a few good quid apparently, and he used to let us stay there for free sometimes whenever bookings were sparse. Some of the best memories of my childhood were in that cottage, walking to and from the beach nearby to build sandcastles or hunt for crabs. But for some reason, we just stopped going, and I never questioned it until years later when I was a teenager. I remember asking my dad, and he told me that Griff just sold the place on because he couldn't afford to keep it anymore. Shame, really, but I took him at his word, so that was that. Not long after that, I get back from rugby practice to see who else but Griff sitting in my parents' kitchen, having a glass of wine with my mom and dad. I pop in to say hello, then make myself scarce to get a shower and get some Modern Warfare 2 in. Then the next time I pop back downstairs to get a bite to eat, the grown-ups are nice and toasty, all pink in the cheeks and laughing at bloody anything and everything. So being a bit cheeky, I say, "Hey Griff, whatever happened to your little college, eh? I used to love going up there when I was a kid." Sold the place, son," he said. "All good things must come to an end." "But you made yourself a few quid off that. Dad said it paid for your Range Rover," I replied, smirking at my dad, who shot me this look that said, "Shut it, you." But then it turned out that Dad wasn't staring daggers at me because I was being lippy about Griff's flashy car. It was for a different reason altogether. So Griff looks a bit nervous, gives my mom a look and says, "Should I tell him?" Mom returns the nervous glance, looks at me like she's thinking about it, all before Dad says, "Diane, he's gonna find out eventually. Better us than his friends telling tales." As you can imagine, I'm just going, What? Tell me," wanting to be in on the gossip. Only it wasn't really gossip. It was horribly serious. Emphasis on the horrible part, too. I'll tell you what they told me. The same year he sold the cottage, Griff takes a week's booking from this lovely newly married English couple. They're an absolute delight to deal with. They seem quiet and calm, and most importantly, they pay their security deposit in full and on time. Week of their stay, Griff goes out to meet them, confirms they're safe as houses, then gives them the keys and buggers off. He doesn't even get so much as a peep from them for the next 7 days. At one point, he even called to ask how they were getting on, but no one answered their phone. Summer is about the only time you can safely go outside in North Wales, so it only seemed logical that the lovely English pair were out and about exploring Anglesey. That, or, doing what newlyweds do. He calls the neighbors, asking if they've heard or seen of them, and they said that they've heard a bit of music, but hardly a rave or anything. So, presumably, nothing to worry about. The following Monday, Griff drives up to the cottage to collect the keys, and as soon as he arrives, he knows something is horribly wrong. As he's walking up the garden path, he can see the front door is ajar, and that one of the front windows is smashed. Thinking something might have happened to the English couple, he starts calling out to them as he walks into the house, but there's no sign of either. Needless to say, the place had been absolutely trashed. Everything was broken, vintage wallpaper had been ripped down, food was left to rot in a fridge that had been disconnected, but worst of all, Griff said he could see flecks of blood almost everywhere. Small amounts, but blood nevertheless. Since he didn't hear anything in reply when he was calling out, he figured the English couple had left at some point before their stay was up, probably after whatever violent confrontation had occurred. But when he walked into the bedroom, he got the fright of his life. There, crouched in the corner of the room, each completely naked, was the English couple. When we walked in, each raised a single finger to their lips, making only one sound. Shh. They had cuts all over their body, presumably self-inflicted, and had scrawled unintelligible words, phrases, and symbols into the wall using whatever stationery they could find. He says it was the one thing he's ever seen that's actually replayed in his nightmares like a movie. And then in the worst versions, they come to visit him and his wife in the middle of the night, leaning over their beds and hushing. Shh. He said he ran out of the cottage, locked himself in his car, and went to phone the police. Then an ambulance turned up to take the couple away once it was determined they weren't a threat to anyone. Apparently, they stayed as quiet as mice until they were in the ambulance. Then the woman started wailing as they drove her away. Both ended up in psychiatric hospitals. No other DNA was found in the house but theirs, and neither has anyone ever talked about what happened to them that week. Griff wasn't interested in finding out either. That just wasn't his remit. And he ended up selling the cottage at a loss instead of forking out for it to be cleaned and renovated. I suppose he'd made enough money from it over the years and finally just wanted to get rid of it. But part of me is awfully tempted to head up there to the old place, just to see what kind of nick it's in now, and maybe I'll book an overnight to stay and see if I can get to the bottom of our very own local mystery. But then again, maybe I'll just stay far, far away from it and keep my sanity intact. I actually stopped telling the story a few years back since people usually accuse me of being a liar or a crazy person. And since I'm neither, I figured I better just shut up about it. But I can promise you, it's true. It wasn't a dream, I wasn't disoriented. My entire immediate family can back me up on it. I know it sounds crazy, I know it sounds impossible, but I was there, and I know what I saw. When I was 11 years old, my mom and dad were driving me out to summer camp. They planned on dropping me off and carrying on up to Lake Tahoe for a week, after which they'd drive back and pick me up on the way back home. The week goes by, camp was pretty good, and we start driving back on a Sunday morning. I'm telling them all the different stories I had from the time there when all of a sudden, I just hear, "Peter, look out!" I look up to see a car coming right at us. My dad swerving to avoid a head-on collision. Then the car abruptly smashed into the side of us, forcing us and skidding off the road. It's honestly a miracle that none of us picked up anything worse than cuts and bruises, but I thank God every single day that He protected us from harm that day. Once it was confirmed we were all right, I remember my dad running up onto the highway to check on the driver of the other vehicle, but the car was empty. Not like the guy had been thrown out from the vehicle because he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Neither am I saying that the guy somehow jumped out and ran because he was joyriding or whatever. There was no one in that car, because there had been no one in the car at the time of the crash. Before you ask, I know for a fact that both doors were closed and that when the cops turned out, not a single one of them was able to find the rogue vehicle's ignition keys. It was like someone had started the car up, gotten out, then somehow found a way to drive it down the highway until it crashed into us. Police ruled out some kind of remote control device too. They took the car apart and found absolutely nothing to suggest that the acceleration or steering had been manipulated from a remote location. So what happened to us that day? The short answer? We have no idea. Obviously, we were in a car accident, but one involving a ghost car? I don't know about that. I'm not one to believe in the supernatural. I believe there's a rational explanation for everything. But I kid you not if I've ever been able to find out exactly what happened to us that day. And if anyone has any suggestions, feel free to drop me a line. I'll be all too happy to listen to your theories. I went to a fairly small Christian college out here in the Midwest. It had a really small student body, everyone knew everyone, and I had this really close-knit group of friends. We'd all stayed in the same dorm, and by the end of our freshman year, we were practically sisters. We all went off on summer break, hoping to keep in touch and knowing we'd all miss each other horribly despite being back home with all of our old friends and family. This was back before group chats and Zoom calls, so we used to have to just text each other individually if we wanted to communicate. I was exchanging texts with all the girls, but then at some point, replies from one girl dropped off completely. I didn't take it personally or anything, so I obviously didn't make a big deal about it, nor did I start complaining to the other girls that she wouldn't reply to my texts. But after like 3 weeks of not hearing from her, and having her duck my calls, I decided to ask one of our friends if there was anything I should know about. That's when she told me that the same girl hadn't been replying to any of her texts either, and that's when we started getting worried. The trouble was, we didn't have any contact details for her other than her cell phone. We only knew that she lived near Aurora, and the college wouldn't tell us her address for data protection reasons or something. We get back from summer break, and the girl is nowhere to be found. We tried to find out if she dropped out or something, but nope, she was still enrolled. So what in God's name happened? Some of us suggested she just ghosted, and that we shouldn't be so morbid by suggesting she suddenly died or whatever. But I swear, I knew something bad had happened. I just knew in my gut. I know 2 semesters isn't exactly a lifetime, but I felt like I knew her well enough to know that her absence meant something bad. About a month of our sophomore year goes by, and one of our friends gets a call from a woman claiming to be the mom of our missing friend. She wanted to know if she could stop by our dorm to talk to us about why her daughter wasn't attending college that year. Obviously, we really did, but because it was her calling, not her daughter, that she must be dead. So, she just blurted out the question and discovered that the answer was more complicated than any of us had thought. The girl was alive, but she couldn't come visit. She couldn't talk about what happened, but her mom could. Apparently, she felt terrible about not keeping in touch, and she missed us just as much as we missed her. But there was a reason she couldn't tell us it all in person, so she sent her mom. Next day, her mom shows up at our dorm, we welcome her inside, and she gives us the bad news. What followed was a lot of tears, a lot of hugging, and a lot of information we found hard to process. During summer break, our girl had gone to a party with a group of her old high school friends. One of them had volunteered to be the designated driver so they could all safely get to and from the party. But when the time came for them to leave, our mutual friend was nowhere to be found. The designated driver tries calling her, only to find her calls go to voicemail every single time. She leaves a voicemail, sends some texts, but eventually has to just collect up who she can to make the drive home. Her mom said her friends were worried, but she was a big girl and could look after herself. They try calling her again the next morning, but again they get no response. Her mom then gets a call, and soon the cops are involved as the mom files a missing persons report. As she's telling us this, one of us pipes up and asks if she can remember the date of the party. She could. And it'll come as no surprise to most of you that her lack of replies to us coincided with the date of that party. But then came the really horrifying details, things I'm not sure we could have ever been ready for. At least 2 whole weeks after she had initially gone missing, a homeless man in a city 80 miles from where the party was saw a girl crawling up to a bus stop. According to him, the girl had broken limbs, had been severely beaten, and was otherwise in an awful state. She begged him for help, and in turn, he ran to get a passerby to call 911. When the EMTs asked her name, it turned out to be none other than our missing friend. In an interview with the cops, our friend said that she had been partying with friends when at some point she totally blacked out. The next thing she remembered was waking up in a room full of guys who were each taking turns doing terrible, evil things to her. When they realized she was awake, they forced a wet cloth over her mouth, and after that, she couldn't remember anything else. And this is where it gets even worse. At one point, our friend came to in a small locked room with nothing but a mattress and a bucket to use as a bathroom. She said she panicked, tried to break her way out of the room, but when whoever was keeping her captive got wind of it, he beat her so badly she thought she'd lost sight in one of her eyes. She said she was so sure that she was going to die, at least if she didn't escape, and I can't even imagine how traumatic that realization must have been. But then at some point, she overheard 3 or 4 men discussing selling and moving something, and she assumed that thing was her. She knew she didn't have much time left, so she came up with an incredibly ingenious plan. When someone came up to deliver her some stale bread and water, she started telling the guy about how she'd gotten her period. The guy responded by tossing some baby wipes into the room with her, but she started telling the guy how she needed an actual bathroom. If she didn't get clean, she'd get an infection, and she'd use the baby wipes, she might get into toxic shock and maybe even die. She later told her mom that she could practically hear the cogs turning in the guy's head, how she'd be of no value to anyone unless she was in fairly decent condition. The guy then drags her from the makeshift prison cell, leads her to a bathroom in what was evidently a small apartment, then guards the door behind her while she does her thing. She knows this is her one chance to escape, and silently rejoices when she sees no bars on the window. But then she sees why they didn't need bars. The apartment was like 4 or 5 stories up, and any attempt to escape via the bathroom window would be tantamount at best. And this is the thing that really messes with me. Our friend thought, if I stay here, I'm dead or worse. If I jump, I either live and go free, or I die and escape a fate worse than death. So she jumped. She climbed up onto the sink, shimmied her way onto the window ledge until she was just hanging there, looking down, then eventually found it in her to just drop. That's how she broke her leg and fractured her elbow. God knows how she managed to crawl away in time, or how far she had to crawl before she found that homeless guy. But hearing that someone I love was forced to endure something like that, it just broke me. Then by the time she was able to direct the cops back to the apartment building, none of her captors were anywhere to be found, and would actually take another 18 months before they caught any of them. Unbelievably, one of the guys who had been in the apartment had left his DNA on a toothbrush. This dumb idiot then files a police report because someone tries to steal his car. The cop takes his prints and DNA to eliminate his profile in the car so they can secure the thief's fingerprints, and boom, they get a match. But not for the car thief, for the owner himself. And the cops then can place him at the prison apartment around the time our friend's abduction. He's doing 60 years in maximum security prison and will only be eligible for parole in 30, meaning some of us might well have grandchildren before he ever sees the light of day. Personally, I hope he dies there. I've seen enough prison dramas to know that people like him tend not to be too popular, even among murderers and gangsters. And that's just about the end of the story. But there is a little piece of good news to end on. A year after we graduated, our friend ended up going back to the very same school to basically pick up where she left off. She graduated, and she's now a nurse who specializes in tending to victims of indecent assault, just like she was. We keep in touch from time to time, and we're planning a reunion whenever all this pandemic stuff blows over. I just hope this story reaches the right people and teaches them the valuable lesson of always partying safely and sticking together. That way, they might never have to endure what she did all those years ago. Back when I was a teenager, every summer break from school resulted in my sleeping pattern getting dangerously askew. I gradually started staying up later and sleeping later until I was waking up at like 3 p.m. and going to bed hours after dawn. And as much as that lifestyle suited me for a while, I'd eventually get bored of missing out on everything that happens in the day, so I tried to fix my pattern. Whenever I'd reach my nocturnal limit, I just put on some jogging clothes, then run circles around the block whilst listening to music on my old MP3 player. Most of the route was just small residential streets, but the longest stretch was down a section of the highway that was fairly open and well lit. This was by far my favorite section to run, but ironically, it also posed one major hazard: people. A surprising number of late-night drivers either shouted something at me from their window, usually some variation of "run, fat boy," or worse, they threw something. Don't worry, I only got hit once, and it was a takeout cup full of ice and what smelled like peach iced tea, so as much as I was sticky afterward, it sure did cool me down a little during my run. Then, there was the time when the passenger of one vehicle almost scared me half to death. I learned pretty quickly that if a car slowed down near me, I should ready for trouble. Usually if they were going to throw something, they'd slow down to the side of the highway and get dead level with me. This obviously gave me a chance to react, as I could pretty much just assume malicious intent. But the car I'm talking about didn't drive up close, and it barely even slowed down. One minute I'm running along, the car brakes suddenly, and then all I see is a woman opening up the rear passenger door before tucking and rolling out of the vehicle. Naturally, seeing this makes me stop dead in my tracks, and I immediately pull out my earphones so I can hear what's going on. The car brakes violently, then starts backing up toward the girl, who's obviously severely hurt, but she's screaming out at me, "Help! Please help me, call the cops!" I just froze up. She was a complete mess. I'm not sure how much of the damage done to her was before or after she basically jumped out of the car, but she was bleeding from all kinds of places. Then, before I even had time to process what I was seeing, the car she was in backs up right up next to her, and a guy in dark clothes and a ski mask jumps out. She's still looking me dead in the eyes, screaming, "Go get help, please," when the guy just scoops her up and drags her back into the vehicle. Once the door slammed, the driver gunned the engine, and they were gone as quickly as they'd appeared. I ran so hard and fast to my house that I thought I was going to puke by the time I was dialing 911. Luckily, the operator was patient with me as I struggled to get my words out, but when she asked me the license plate number of the car, I realized I had almost no idea what the model or tags of the car were. All I could tell them, it was a black 4x4 and was headed down a particular set of highway, and a girl had thrown herself out, begging for help. The dispatcher assured me it was okay, and that she could route units exactly where they were needed, and that I'd done the right thing to call the cops. But after that, I heard nothing about it for weeks, not until a detective called me asking if I could remember anything distinguishing about the vehicle or the men inside. Again, all I could give them were the sparsest of details, and I could tell the guy was getting frustrated with me. I can barely describe how much that screwed with my head afterward, like he was relying on me for any incriminating details so he could nail a conviction or something, and all I'd done is let him down. I get it though. It must have been really frustrating. A tough case, and I'm willing to bet it haunted anyone who learned of it, because it sure haunted me for a long time after. Back when I was very young, me and my family would always go to the same street festival here in Florence, Italy during the summer break from school. It's supposed to be a religious festival, something to do with a saint or martyr, but we just use it as an excuse to get drunk, eat lots of food, and put on a lot of shows and performances. It's really a lot of fun, but I remember one year when something very scary happened to me that I've never forgotten about. I remember me and my mom stopped to watch a puppet show, and I was totally fixated by all the amazing decorated puppets. They were very beautiful and detailed, but also, I couldn't see how or by who they moved. It was like watching a magic show and a puppet show all at once. So when I felt something take my hand and lead me away, I just followed them thinking it was my mom. But then, something doesn't feel right with her hand. It's hard to say in English, but for me, I know it's not my mom. I look up to see a woman with blonde hair, and my mom had dark hair. This woman had a lot of makeup on too. She almost looked like a clown. Definitely not my mom. So I say to her, "Non sei mia mamma." But she just laughs at me like I said something funny and says in Italian, "Oh, you're so silly, always joking around." So I said it again. Non sei mia mamma." "You're not my mom." I was screaming it. Her hand all of a sudden gets very tight on mine, so much it hurt me, and she began to drag me harder and harder into a very big crowd. "Shut it," she shouted at me. I was so scared I thought I was going to lose my mom and dad forever and have to live with this Puntana clown woman as my new mother. So I call out for my dad saying, "Papa, Papa, salvami, salvami." And suddenly, he grabbed me, took me away from the woman while shouting for the police. But the clown woman very quickly walked into the crowd and she just sorta disappeared very quickly. I remember this every single year at the same time as the festival, and I thank God that my papa was there to save me. Many years later, I asked them if the woman was arrested, and they say no, that they never saw her again and the police didn't find her. But they talk about it like it's not a big deal. She didn't take their daughter, so it's not a problem for them. But for others, it could still very well be a problem. And I pray to God she's arrested and not taking children all these many years later. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data. Located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.